This is organized by Retrofit Information Support and Expertise RISE event, which is funded by Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, delivered by Turner and Townsend. So over to Megan to begin the masterclass.
Thanks, Varsha. So yeah, thanks all for attending today. My name is Megan Creswell. I'm a senior consultant at Turner and Townsend. So we're working on the RISE programme, mostly in the supply chain side of the RISE programme at the moment. But we've been working across the kind of grant recipient programme for the last few years as well. So yeah, the agenda today we're kind of going through a very high level overview of the changes, kind of the impacts, what it means for you as both supply chain and housing associations, and the requirements under the Warm Homes programme as well. So yeah, just a high level overview of the changes of RdSAP 10. So changes to the new way EPCs are calculated for the UK's 27 million existing homes were officially rolled out by the government on the 15th of June. So a couple of weeks now in place. These changes represent the most significant update in nearly 20 years to the calculation and default values within the RdSAP, which produces the EPC bands of A to G that we're all familiar with. So for some time, as most of you will know, there's been a call for domestic EPCs to be updated to better reflect how our existing homes perform. And there's also an EPC consultation in the background happening, kind of about a review of that whole process. But kind of in the interim, RdSAP 10 has come in. It comes as part of the UK's broader aim to achieve net zero emissions and high energy efficiency standards. So it goes towards that goal of supporting net zero by 2050. It provides more rigorous evidence-based data for assessors, which aims to improve accuracy of EPC ratings, ensure homes sold or rented reflect real world performance, and it better informs retrofit decisions and grant funding allocations. So that's actually really interesting to pull out of the BRE guidance. And yeah, if you haven't had a look, do have a look at the full updates and articles on the BRE website. But there is a mention around kind of support in the grant funding allocations, and obviously the move, it should link to kind of the move towards the standards that the government are putting into that guidance. So as part of the Warm Homes programme and looking further beyond as well. So yeah, obviously this focuses on RdSAP, which is kind of changes to the existing domestic dwellings, as obviously the change to the full SAP, which for new builds as well. So if that kind of impacts you, worth working with kind of new build side development teams to review kind of designs as well to see how much impact that has. We'll go through some of the changes, and the impacts it has on you as an organisation, but yeah, worth just investing some time looking at the kind of main changes or working with your assessors, DEAs to make sure that this is, fully embedded in your organisation as it's been rolled out and, is live. There's no longer the use of the previous version. So yeah, worth getting your head around and reviewing the information. So the main aims of the changes is to provide more accurate assessments. So RdSAP 10 will rely more on actual measurements rather than assumptions. Improved categorisation and energy efficiency ratings for various heating systems. It provides homeowners and landlords with clearer insights into insulation, heating systems and overall energy performance. It's allowed for the integration of renewable technologies like battery storage, so it offers more comprehensive assessments for homes using renewable energy sources, and it's brought into account some new age bands, so the post-2023 build properties, and adds new regional classifications for more relevant and detailed assessments. So essentially, RdSAP 10 is providing a more detailed and accurate options for assessing a property's energy performance. So while these updates mean assessments will take longer, the enhanced details aim to produce more accurate and actionable EPCs, better reflecting each home's true efficiency. It's useful still to consider the interaction between EPCs and using technology to gather real-time data on the performance of the property, as obviously still relying on a kind of a snapshot of time, doesn't take into account any changes and actually potentially how that property is performing for that resident living there. So when we look at some of the key changes from the previous version, which was RdSAP 12, this covers measurement changes. So measurements for all windows are now required, where previously this wasn't part of the process. So obviously there's a time impact there really, but it's gathering better data and more in detailed information on heat loss and thermal efficiencies. More accurate calculation for hot water consumption and lighting energy. So there's a whole kind of update on lighting in particular, because I think it was very limited to what information was collected before, but I think there's now 5 parts around lighting which go into detail about what needs to be collected by the assessor. So there's additional technologies added. So yeah, the main one I think which will impact a lot of projects is the solar PV batteries and the PV diverter for for hot water has been added under the assessment. Interestingly, window shutters has been added as a new feature, which is really interesting. I suppose all the hot weather we've had recently, this might become something which landlords consider adding into their retrofit programs. I think there'll be more of a focus on cooling and how we approach that, climate adaptation, as we can't get away now from this hot weather. We've seen it for the last few years. So yeah, SAP now recognises window shutters, so that comes into the assessment. So it'll be really interesting to see that in practice. The hot waters, there's a bit more focus on hot water tank size, and the thickness of the insulation gets measured, whereas before I think it was very basic information. And then there's the inclusion of heat interface units, new heating controllers, and additional fuels in the product characteristics database. So yeah, just kind of lots of detail, particularly for your DEA to understand and get used to. It might potentially be some additional upskilling and training where they have to collect additional information they might not know about. So yeah, worth checking in with your assessors to see if they feel confident with gathering all the information that's required, or whether there is additional training that's needed. So just carrying on with some other revisions. So energy and emissions, the fuel prices have been updated, and CO2 emissions covering monthly variations have been included. There's a revised self-use factor for PV systems considering battery storage and PV diverters. So some very clever calculations have gone into that, which will hopefully kind of maximize efficiencies on those kind of technologies. Heating and ventilation, so revised distribution loss factors for communal heating networks. So that could be quite significant, particularly with the heat network kind of regulations now for landlords, being seen as energy providers. There is a potential kind of knock on as well with the new RdSAP that it could have a negative impact because they've taken into account more losses on the communal heat networks than there was previously. Updated chimney and flue airflow rates, because I think there's quite a lot on ventilation. I think previously it just took into account open fires, but it takes into account like a lot more elements to it now, and you record that down as part of the assessment. So it should have a better overview of ventilation, which is obviously increasingly important and will help with some of the legislation that you're facing as well, hopefully. Revised treatment of mechanical ventilation, heat recovery system and performance, and adjusted the assumed standard heating pattern just in line with the kind of UK standards. I think it was a bit outdated. So just carrying on, the building characteristics and data. So there's updated reference building characteristics. Infiltration rate calculation can include an air pressure test result, which obviously kind of aligns potentially with PAS 2035, so you can integrate those assessments. Removal of summer gains check, which is under Appendix P. So that's a bit around kind of overheating. And then efficiency and recovery system, so wastewater heat recovery system calculations according to SAP 10.2 in the Appendix G. So that's kind of the high level changes in terms of the impact on you as organisations. In terms of supply chain, the changes to the SAP methodology are likely to impact installers in the following ways. So an increase in product demand and distribution requirements, additional training and certification requirements may be required, enhanced inventory management requirement, and the changes will also impact future government funding schemes. So there's the potential for surveys to take longer. So there could be a cost increase. I read somewhere that I think that they're potentially averaging a cost increase of between £10 to £30 per survey. This, I suppose, if you're looking at this on a one-off basis, it won't really have an impact. But if you're a landlord with thousands of homes, this could have quite a notional impact across the board, which needs to be factored in, I suppose, to your strategy, when calculating costs and that long-term plan. But yeah, again, we just covered some of the kind of main changes and what impacts it has. I think we go into a bit more detail about that increased focus on certain measures. So yeah, the impact on landlords. So yeah, the potential changes are that RdSAP 10 requires more detailed inputs, which can have the effect of lowering the rating if the property lacks modern insulation or energy efficient systems. However, homes with modern upgrades may see improved ratings under RdSAP 10. So yeah, it's worth reviewing this kind of strategically and through an operational lens as well, the impacts it's going to have. Obviously, you might be seeing it live through your current Warm Homes programme delivery, the impact it's having on just, from archetype or home to home. Yeah, in some cases, there will be winners and losers as a result of the updated calculation. So like I just said, homes benefiting from retrofitting low carbon technology like solar PV, heat pumps, battery storage should be rewarded with EPC increases. But owners of flats and mid-terrace homes will also benefit from better heat loss modelling, more detailed calculations, which should reflect better performance of those archetypes. Addressing air tightness and evidencing well-sealed older homes will overcome poor default air pressure values. But it could be negative on those landlords or property owners who are not able to provide documentation for works that have been carried out, and homes with outdated heating systems and hot water systems that may see performance fall. So I suppose that all kind of is quite clear, it makes sense. Yeah, I think generally with EPCs you've needed documentation, but I think it's just it's quite specific on some of the documentation you need and evidence you need to be able to state that those works have been carried out. So obviously when you're carrying out your retrofit works, it's really important for the installers and the kind of assessors, coordinators, to make sure they are monitoring and keeping all that documentation safe to be able to evidence these with the, within the post-install EPC changes. I think in practice it'd be useful to hear from some of you about how it's kind of going in practice, but I've heard there's quite a lot of bugs with the software, some interesting calculations we've seen just from homes, going from the old version to the new version, but also, going from a pre-install EPC to a post-install EPC and how different measures are affecting. I think where we saw under RdSAP 12, you might have needed 2 measures to get to the EPC C rating, potentially with some of these low carbon heat and technology. You might only now need 1 measure rather than the kind of dual measure. So it can potentially be big cost savings for some landlords, but it very much depends on kind of archetypes, the information you've got on your properties, I suppose how old kind of the stock is, the condition of the properties. But worth doing a big review. If you've got modelling software, you can obviously do that with the software. And then potentially looking at your kind of case about how many EPCs you'll get done a year, or if that's in your strategy to carry that out, how you go about doing that, and whether you potentially approach certain properties that would have bigger impacts. You do it on an archetype basis to try and get your data as accurate as possible. So I'm just having a review of I suppose these 3 points at the bottom actually are slightly different to what I've gone through already. So potential changes to EPC ratings poses the biggest challenge. It can lead to the following impacts. It could invalidate existing retrofit plans or require changes to the prioritisation of investment strategies. I would argue that, to be honest, once you've done an EPC, whether it's on the old standard or this one, they are a snapshot in time. So it's something that needs to be thought about as a rolling kind of collection of data anyway, and how you would react to changes in calculations and stuff. Obviously, this one will now be around for a while, but you could argue that it's not just the RdSAP 10 that's having those impacts. That actually, even like an assessment it could change if there's been changes made to the property since that's been carried out. I suppose for private landlords, it can affect compliance with the MEES. So you might now have homes that fall into the categories where you need to address those properties. So I suppose for private landlords, worth assessing that on an archetype basis to see how much of an impact it's having and how much you're going to need to invest to bring them up to standard. And it can impact longer term decarbonisation targets and compliance with local authority or government mandates. I think I remember working with an organisation during the Warm Homes bid window, and they were saying it was almost putting, I think, about 4,000 homes up to a C already. So obviously that's going to have a massive impact in how they've planned out their investment plan, their targets in a positive way, but potentially impacts their project that they had planned out. And just reviewing that investment target. But also it could be that you've had resistance maybe from your board for things like heat pumps previously, and this can go towards supporting that argument a bit further. Things like oil, LPG, solid fuel should be more negative under RdSAP 10. So again, like I know a lot of organisations are still replacing oil, normally due to resident preference, but that will just help that strategic backing and go towards goes further towards the reasonings for getting rid of fossil fuel boilers and replacing with heat pumps. So yeah, just a few tips on how to approach RdSAP 10, I suppose. So keep on top of the changes. It's important to ensure you're prepared and proactive. And there's several ways to ensure that the changes won't catch you by surprise. So you can stay informed, you can review training and certification, you can use the updated tools, communicate it with your clients, residents, boards, review your processes and review your target and kind of milestone setting, as I said previously. So yeah, to stay informed, you want to check the BRE website and accreditation bodies for updates. So I know, like I said, there's been a few bugs in certain softwares, so worth just kind of checking any of those with your accreditation bodies for updates and when things are going to get sorted and fixed. As I said about training, you want to make sure your assessors are up to date with everything, with all the relevant training. They may need to complete specific refresher training or certain technical courses just to bring them up to speed on what they need to collect, what information they need to gather. Yeah, making sure you're using the updated software. Communication is obviously key in every program, so just keeping that open. I suppose where you might find some issues is where residents, you've been engaged because they were eligible under the old SAP, and you potentially now they're not. There's some hard conversations you've got to have there, whether you keep them in your retrofit program and obviously just self-fund them without outside of the funding is a possibility, or if you're not, then you've got to explain that in a manner that it's not going to cause too many issues for both of you. Review the processes. So it's a great time to review and adapt your processes to ensure they meet the new standards. As I said, it's probably going to be quite a lot of work reviewing the data, looking at archetypes, reviewing your business plans, your 5 to 30 year plans, how you're going to get to net zero. It could potentially have a big impact. So hopefully you've kind of got data people in your team who can support you with that. But if not, there's other ways of updating all those processes. So yeah, just a bit of a summary of the requirements of RdSAP 10 in warm homes. There's quite a lot of guidance on it. I think it's been updated recently, so please do take a look in both the local grant and the Social Housing Fund warm homes guidance. There's a chunk on it that's quite clear, I think. Obviously, RdSAP is the essential element for calculating the EPCs, which is a requirement under any government funded retrofit schemes. So yeah, it must align with the latest version. I mean, there is no other version now, so there's no option there really. So that guidance is from April. I feel like it might have even been updated since then, so do please check it, but it's probably quite similar. Retrofit assessments will not be allowed to use the old version once RdSAP 10 is live. So yeah, again, please do check with both your DAs, but also your retrofit assessors as well to ensure they're fine with that process. So the post-retrofit energy performance reports can still be generated using RdSAP 12 if the pre-retrofit assessment occurred before the go-live date of RdSAP 10. In these cases, an EPC will not be required and DESNZ will accept the EPR. And I think this is where Trustmark lodgement and PAS only requires a post-retrofit EPR to satisfy their requirements. And I think the reporting and part of the scheme is to provide a post on EPC, but DESNZ have clarified that is fine to provide, is acceptable as part of the scheme to provide an EPR, but only where the pre-install EPC was done under RdSAP 12. So hopefully that shouldn't halt things too much in terms of your project progress if you start doing a lot of your data collection already. New projects starting after the RdSAP 10 go live date must be fully assessed using RdSAP 10 to be PAS 2035 and Trustmark compliant. Energy savings modelling. So yeah, I mean, this is obviously, everyone should know this by now. The part of the funding is you can either use SAP, RdSAP, or to model your housing stock, and it must be in one of those formats. I think the main system assessment people use is RdSAP. So obviously, hopefully this has been useful for you. But yeah, if there are any, I think there's some of the others do get used on a smaller basis, and obviously there's changes to how SAP is calculated as well, which is a bit more in depth, and it's very difficult to do on a existing homes basis. So I think that covers everything. I feel like it was relatively quick. There are some useful links here, and I assume the presentation will go out so you can read these in your own time. Actually, as I said, yeah, going on the guidance is really useful to pull out the changes and the way DESNZ are telling people to approach it, and I think it's quite clear. So hopefully there's not too many queries about that. And yeah, so then on demand, we record masterclasses, so you can follow up if you feel like you've missed anything.